Welcome to this video. Now we are going to start analyzing the line g3, knight to d7. A move that has been always played once in a while. It did enjoy some occasional popularity, but it never became a main line or something. But I expect the trend to change, because during the last year a lot of strong grandmasters have picked it as black. For example, Alexeyenko beat Karakin and managed to actually yield a spot in the candidates tournament thanks to this game. Many other eminent grandmasters, such as for example Jeffrey Chong and Vallejo Pons Francisco, have played this as well. Black clearly wants to go e5, and we'll be discussing the move bishop g2 in a different video and the move d4 in a different video, but now I would like us to start with the move c4. And even though typically in any, video courses, databases, books, the beginning is usually the least theoretically challenging stuff. Actually, this video would be a little bit different, and here I would definitely say that this chapter is quite challenging and quite ambitious for white. Now, we're gonna take this pawn. And here, white has many ways to continue. In my opinion, the most critical move is queen to a4, but let's briefly cover the rest. If white is to, let's say, develop with bishop g2, then we are immediately playing e5. And then, if, for example, white doesn't really care, then we're gonna play e4 and knight f6, and actually we'll be discussing this position in a different chapter, in a chapter where white plays bishop g2 on move 3, so I won't be speaking too much about this. And on the other hand, if white is, let's say, to play something like queen a4, then again we also transpose to a different line, the line with the move 4, queen to c2. So this is not a problem, or rather this doesn't have much of an independent meaning. And on the other hand, if white starts with queen c2 here, then again we play e5 as claimed, as suggested, and after bishop g2, knight f6, queen c4, we are going to get some rather English or reversed Sicilian looking position, where in my opinion black's very, very comfortable, because the queen on c4 is really not doing all that much. We can always gain the time by attacking this piece with moves like knight b6, bishop e6 and stuff, and I definitely think black's doing very comfortable, because white would like to make a move like knight c3, but after knight b6 it's going to prove really, really uncomfortable. Then if white is to start with a move like knight a3, again e5 is very, very powerful. Now we're just wanting to take that knight and stop white from even regaining his pawn, and if white is to take, then after e4 he is actually running in a lot of trouble, because for example if white plays something like knight d4, we have something like knight b6, and well, taking is going to open up the file for us and start hanging this knight, while for example after e3, one game between two strong grandmasters continued in such an unfortunate way for white. White played knight e5 here, and after c5, suddenly his position just ended up much, much, much worse. So those are all things I wanted to mention very briefly. Here Goganov didn't manage to just even get out of the opening as white without suffering any major problems. But finally, after all that very brief introduction to the idea with e5, we are going to discuss lines which have more of a Catalan flavor, lines with queen a4, where after a6 white takes and actually gets something very similar to Catalan. In many cases it's actually a transposition to the Neo-Catalan, but to the line which is in my opinion very solid for black, and via the move order where white lost a lot of dangerous options. So here, white clearly doesn't want to be making moves like queen c6 or something, because it's just going to run into the tempi. And after the main move queen c2, I'm also covering other moves in the file, but guys, I don't want to make this video run for too long, so queen c2, bishop b7, bishop g2, and then after knight f6, castling e6, we get to the actual Neo-Catalan. Now, if white were to make a move d4, that would actually make our ideas with c5 and rook c8 a lot more powerful, because now the queen would actually be very, very exposed on c2. And after the move c5, black's immediately starting to fight for the advantage even. For example, if white were to take, after something like bishop c5 and rook c8, now ideas like b4, forcing the knight away, and bishop takes f2 appear, and some games, even of the at the grandmaster level, so ideas like bishop g5 or white would give up this bishop pair, but clearly black is just much better here. He is gonna play, let's say, queen b6, rook fd8, with the obvious advantage, thanks to the bishop pair and the higher activity. White just failed his opening completely. And on the other hand, white can try something like a4, but again, after, let's say, taking, and let's say rook c8 first, well, black clearly has no problems. He can play b4, going for the ambitious way of handling the position, where he is grabbing space and staking the square on c3 away from the white knight, or he can play queen b6, just developing, protecting the pawn, and intending to just develop bishop e7 or bishop c5. Black is doing great. But the real challenge, and something I wanted to explain in the video, well, white has many moves like d3, b3, but the real challenge, in my opinion, is the line that has been seen in many Aronian games with white. After a4, c5, for example, d3, again, moves like knight c3 will just transpose. Let us get to the very important theoretical position from the Neo-Catalan or anti-Catalan. I would like to explain that here, this is a very important position, theoretically. Queen b3. Black needs to handle this very carefully. Now, it is easy to get confused, and it's easy to start going wrong. For example, the move bishop c6 can easily lead you to a lot of trouble, because after something like knight d2, white's trying to trade this bishop and put pressure on b5. And for instance, if you take and take, and if you play something like b4, the more pieces are gone, the more serious the fact that the square on c4 is weak and that this bishop on e7 is bad are going to matter. So we don't want to play a position like this. It's very dangerous potentially. And it's possible to play the move b4 here, which is completely acceptable. But again, I feel a little bit uncomfortable about the fact that we've conceded the square on c4, and about the fact that our bishop isn't really the brightest piece out there. I don't want to be playing such a position, personally. And while you can, I would suggest we do something else. We're gonna play knight d5. This move is tactically justified. We're not hanging that pawn on b5, because if white takes, then he is just losing after knight c3. Now the queen is hanging, of course, and if queen b6, then after knight e2, black wins a piece, thanks to the intermediate check. And if white is to take with the knight, then after bishop c6, again, he is getting a very serious problem. Now he needs to bail out with the move e4, but then, after some forcing line like this, black ends up with a very clear positional advantage. This is no good. So white continues with bishop g5. This is the move Aronian chose between in his game versus Wojtaszek. And actually, black ran in some trouble in this game. So that is the line I was initially a little unhappy about, and I'm very happy I've managed to make it work after several hours of painful attempts. Here, after trading, and f6, bishop d2. This is how the game between Aronian and Wojtaszek continued. Castling, rook a1, bishop b7, knight e1. Black started getting outplayed from now on. He took on g2, and then after knight g2, queen c6, queen b3, c4, he got himself a weak pawn on c4. And now, the fact that, let's say, his king side is a little bit wrecked also did tell. White took, played queen c2, and eventually the problems with this pawn and the problems with the king side did lead to the white victory. Actually, in my opinion, this is a very cool game, so do take a look at it. It's just very interesting, not even opening-wise. But the very important idea that I have here, even though I know that my philosophy, like I had said, and which is something I had expressed in the text pretty much everywhere, I've been usually trying to get off the trodden path early on and suggest some early novelties. And here I'm suggesting a novelty on move 19, which is extremely deep, of course, but in my opinion this is a very important line, which you really cannot avoid, or you can maybe, but you shouldn't be wanting to. Black has a very cool move king f7, which I really like, because since several pieces are traded, the king is in no danger on f7, and here it's protecting the pawn on e6, and it's depriving white of all the kinds of potential tactical ideas related to the weakness of that pawn, and in the event if the pieces get traded, the king on f7 would be very appropriate. It would be easily able to come closer to the center once we make it to an endgame. So I think that here, black actually has no concerns at all. For example, after taking, we can play rook c8, or we can play, for example, knight e5, and then knight c6, knight d4, or possibly we might want to go rook a8 and trade the rooks. And even though these pawns on f6 and e6 do look a little strange, black is absolutely safe and absolutely happy because he has somewhat more space and his minor weaknesses are easily covered and easily compensated for by the abundance of space. So that is a very important theoretical conclusion in my opinion, and something I wanted to share. And there's a lot more, but again, I didn't want to, make this video run forever, and I didn't want to baby walk you through every single possible line. You're all good players, you can study everything yourself, and you might even omit some lines because they might not be as critical, but I did want to highlight a few very important subtleties and details that you might easily miss if you're just, browsing through the file, because often it's not easy to tell which line is important and which one isn't. And I hope that would give you a fairly sound start. And of course, I hope you will check the PGN out and work the rest out yourself. Thank you for watching, and we'll meet in the next clip.